Happy Friday, everybody.
Same to you.
You too.
As we're getting started here, and my apologies, we're a few minutes behind. We had a meeting earlier where the prompt was, what's one word that describes what you most need right now? So if people want to hop in the chat and add that, what's one word that describes what you most need? Mine was decision. So whatever speaks to you. Money, oh, that's yes, fair enough.
One.
Ooh, radical patience.
Yeah, I like radical patience.
That's real. Okay. Well, we're going to get started today. Thanks everybody for being here. I know everyone has been, I feel like everyone everywhere has been super distracted, rightfully so. We're going to start with our regular public health updates, and then we're going to turn it over to Emily and do things a little bit in a different order today, just to make some space. And then we've got a host of people to hear from. So I think we can go ahead to the next slide. Great. So as of November 5th, there are 21,596 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Boston residents. That's up 201 from our previous count. For the week ending on Friday, October 30th, Boston had more people tested than the week before, and fewer tested positive. So our positive test rate right now is 7.2%, which is down from the week before. There are still neighborhoods and zip codes where that number is going up. So on average, it's gone down from the previous count, but we know that this is a really difficult time with case numbers still increasing and some neighborhoods still facing increasing positivity rates. So the mobile testing sites from the Health Commission are, I think, concentrated in East Boston right now. But again, you can go to the city website to find out about where testing locations are, and I'll get to that a little bit more in a second. But the big news this week from the state were new advisories. So a stay-at-home advisory for the hours between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. I only chuckle at this because I am definitely not leaving my home after 10 p.m. these days. But I know that restaurants are having a strong reaction to that. Of course, there are exceptions for going to work, running critical errands like groceries and medications, accessing healthcare, et cetera. A requirement for businesses to close in-person services at 9:30, and this is the one that the restaurants are clearly having a hard time with. This includes restaurants, liquor stores, gyms, and indoor and outdoor events. An updated order requiring you to wear a face covering in all public places, even if you are able to maintain 6 feet of distance. And indoor gatherings, including in private residences, are limited to 10 people, and outdoor gatherings to 25 people. The limits on events in public spaces and event venues remain in place, which is already, I think, what Boston had. In Boston, that's 25 people indoors and 50 people outdoors. And yes, we're seeing an uptick in cases, and particularly as we get close to the holidays, we're going to be hearing a lot of public health messaging about really, really playing it safe, staying at home, not doing informal family gatherings, and of course, getting tested. So if we go to the next slide. There is a City of Boston testing pledge that's available, and I'll share the link in the chat in a minute. And this is a way to encourage individuals and businesses to share information about when to get tested, how to get tested, and to also, for companies, make sure that you're taking any steps that you can to not penalize people for going and getting tested. So in the City of Boston, what they've done in our own kind of HR environment is to allow city employees to get 1 paid hour every 14 days to get tested during normal work hours. and we're receiving regular compensation during that time when we're getting tested. So we don't have to use sick time or personal time. And if, for the organizations on this call, I think, just from seeing your own communications and knowing you all, people are doing a good job of sharing this information. But if you are already doing this, or there's some small steps that you can take and you can sign up to take the pledge, I would really encourage you to do so, and just to be part of the kind of positive messaging around this. Again, especially as we go into Thanksgiving and holidays. And I'll put the link in the chat. There is a social toolkit. So there are some kind of pre-written tweets and images and other things to show that you're participating in this and you're part of the city solution. And I don't see any questions right away. I think this is routine, hopefully, at this point, but it's going to get harder. And we are hearing all the time from people who are saying, that they're just fatigued and they're tired of being isolated. And people are making those like little choices to be in casual environments with friends and family. And that's a lot of how our case numbers are increasing. So we have to stick to it. And I will put the link in the chat in a minute, and we can go to the next slide. Here we go. I think this is my cue to turn it over to Emily.
All credit for this slide goes to Cara Elliott Ortega. 2020 election and the tagline, how we've all aged 15 years in a matter of days. So there we had an election on Tuesday, and I'm sure many of us are still watching and waiting and refreshing whatever election presidential vote count platform you're using. The New York Times is outrageously frustrating, but is the one I'm sticking to. But so we couldn't, if you don't mind, let's move along on the slides, because I want to talk and focus on some good news. Can you go one back? No. Oh no, can we, yay, thank you. Okay, so I want to just focus on the Massachusetts voter stats and election results. So, many of you on this call participated in our part of the Create the Vote campaign 2020, which was about the creative sector coming together and advocating for increased voter registration, education, and turnout. And so our efforts, along with the efforts of many voting advocacy groups and individuals in Massachusetts, yielded 3.4 million votes cast in the general election, which is an increase from 2016. And that number is from November 4th with 98% reporting. Obviously, the deadline for mail-in ballots is today at 5 p.m., I believe, although someone's gonna correct me in the chat, I hope, if I'm wrong. And I will read that live. That matters, right? We've seen across the country how that matters, how in particular key states that mattered a lot, but it matters in Massachusetts too, right? So I want to just talk about the results from Massachusetts. So Democrats continue to hold a supermajority in both the House and the Senate. In fact, there are only 3 members of the GOP in the state Senate now officially. So that means many things or nothing, but it's continued to be a super majority. I do want to flag that we have 2 new state senators, and then we have 15 new state reps. And so I know that on this call, for the most part, we're folks who are focused on Boston or the greater Boston area, but you should take a look and see if you or your organization have a new rep, and make it a point of dropping a note of introduction and telling them why you care about the arts or why your organization is making a difference in their district. Right now is the time when we should start thinking about that. The other thing I want to just note is that there were 2 ballot questions on the ballot. The first was the right to repair, which had to do with giving independent repair shops access to proprietary computer software related to car repair. That's as far as I know. When I read the ballot question, that passed. The second one was to implement ranked choice voting in Massachusetts versus a majority vote and then a runoff vote if there wasn't a majority in votes, and it did not pass. So those were the items that were on the ballot. If we could move to the slide that says Art for Wellness, that may be, yeah, is that back one? Thank you. And I apologize, Christina, for my misordering of the slides. So this has been a lot for a lot of us for many different reasons, right? Some of us engaged in elections in a new way and put energy and focus on that. Some of us continue to have to shoulder a lot of emotional and intellectual labor on issues that they shouldn't based on their identities. And so we want to acknowledge that, and we want to acknowledge that that while our advocacy work is a long-term process and path, it is really important that we take a beat and we pause and we breathe. And so we, MassCreative and the MassCreative and the Create the Vote steering committee worked with Arts Connect International and Theater Offensive to pay for 3 artists to create meditations on the election, on renewing energies. And so you can see those 3 here, and they are hyperlinked when you get the slide deck. We hope you'll take advantage of those. And we want to thank especially Arts Connect International for leading that work with us. So just a reminder of self-care, and that is sometimes a very political act. If we could move, I guess it's to thank you. I apologize again. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about what's happening on the state budget. I will pause to say this. We are still waiting to see what the results are of this election and how that will affect any 4th federal stimulus bill. It is unclear. We do know right now, I think that we're going to see a runoff for 2 Senate seats that would be in Georgia, but it is unclear what that means in terms of Congress's inertia to pass a 4th stimulus bill. We know that all of our members, congressional delegation members, support a 4th stimulus bill, but we will update you as we know that. So then on the state level, when we're talking about funding, yesterday, the House Ways and Means Committee released their draft of the fiscal year 21 budget proposal. The way that the process works is, you know, the governor releases his draft usually in January. He did a revised one last month. Then the House takes it up. They release a proposal. The House debates it. They pass it. The Senate Ways and Means releases their proposal. The Senate debates it. They pass it. A conference committee comes together of the House and the Senate, negotiates the differences between the 2. They pass out of both chambers. It goes to the Baker, where he can either veto or sign it into law. And he can do line item vetoes, as we know. So that's my quick refresh. Top highlights. The House recommended put in their draft version 18.1 million for the Mass Cultural Council, which is the majority of how state dollars get distributed to the creative community in Massachusetts. That's pretty profoundly good news, to be honest with you. So Baker's proposal was 16.3. This is 18.1. 18.1 is what the Mass Cultural Council received last year, so it's level funding. And I think this is the context that's usually really helpful, is that in order to balance the budget this year, the House is taking 1.5 billion from the rainy day fund. They're also using federal CARES money, and they're using Medicaid reimbursements in order to balance that whole budget. So the fact that we didn't get a cut is good news. And in the next breath, I'm going to say, I recognize that $18.1 million is not nearly enough of a investment or an amount of recovery dollars for the creative sector in Massachusetts, given the losses that we've sustained over the last 8 months. So those 2 things are true at the same time. So the Mass Cultural Council has decided they are not asking for an amendment from any reps, specifically the chair, McMurtry, who usually would file an amendment in this process to increase the budget amount. They are not asking for that, and we're going to move to the Senate side once that happens, right? The other things that I just want to clock, because these are things that we monitor, is that Chapter 70 funding, which is local aid, and which is a place where education dollars come from many communities, and which then oftentimes results in arts education support in those communities, is they're saying it's at 3.5 billion. That's the same as the governor. And then they have put in for 4 million for the Small Business Technical Assistance Grant Program, which is, this is a typo, I'm sorry, on my slide. Baker had put it at 6 million. And then finally, they did not include a provision for the Regional Economic Development Grants, whereas Baker had proposed a $6 million grant program through that. The other thing to know is when I say debate, what will happen is legislators, reps have until 8 p.m. today to file any amendments to that budget. And then next week, they'll debate, they'll take up those amendments and vote yay or nay on those before finally passing the full package. We are tracking those amendments as they come in. The ones that we've flagged already is that there are 2 related to unemployment relief for nonprofits who self-insure. The first one is that Rep. Hay has filed an amendment which would create a payment deadline extension, as well as a payment plan option for nonprofits who still have liability and need to pay into the unemployment trust fund. And then Representative McMurtry has submitted an amendment which would create basically a forgiveness fund, right? So we know 50% of the unemployment that nonprofits are expected to pay is being forgiven by the feds, and this would take care of the other 50. Through our conversations and with our work with the larger nonprofit sector, we are hearing that Rep. Hayes' amendment is probably more viable, but we will continue to monitor those too. And if there are any amendments that really sort of dramatically impact the creative sector, we may put out an action alert, but it's probably likely that MassCreative won't do one for this budget. So that is, I'm just seeing in the chat. Hi, Emily. Can you repeat the Chapter 70 number? Yeah, so the Chapter 70 number is 3.5 billion. That is the same amount that Governor Baker recommended as well. Can we move to the next slide? Christina, do I have a next slide? Yeah. So I just want to give you all a quick update. So last time we talked, we were talking about like the overall relief and public support for the arts community. And there's been, yeah, did I not say 5.3 billion? I meant 5.3 billion. Okay, sorry. Okay, great. Sorry, forgive me all. I'm a little distracted this week, so patience, kindness, and grace is appreciated. So I just want to do some updates. So in Baker's recovery plan, which is a partnership for recovery, that's the title, there was a line for $2 million for cultural facilities and arts and museums, right? Arts groups and museums. The RFP is being developed right now between the Mass Cultural Council and the Office of Economic Development. We will see how that rolls out probably, as soon as possible. They have to turn that money around and get it out the door by December 31st. So it's going to be a pretty quick process. I unfortunately have to update everyone. We had thought that that was 10 million of new dollars. It turns out it's not. It is 8 million of new dollars, and that it is 2 million that was included in the legislature's CARES supplemental budget that was passed over the summer. So that's where that amount is coming from. I had hoped that in fact it really meant that there was like 12 million going out in direct relief to the creative sector, but it's 10. The other thing is that we're not seeing any movement on the economic development bond bill at the moment. I suspect we will once this budget gets passed. And then just as a refresher, we already talked about the 18.1 that the House is recommending for Mass Cultural Council budget, and the Cultural Facilities Fund is already a done deal for this year. So that is, I believe the grant program is already live. So that is also still in place. So just a quick recap on that. I think that's everything I've got. As always, I'm happy to take questions in the chat, and thank you all for all of your work over the last bit of time in terms of encouraging participation in the census and encouraging voter education, registration, and turnout. It is meaningful and it does matter. So thank you all.
Great, thanks, Emily. And now if we go to the next slide, we are going to hear from John Andrus from the ICA.
Hey, everyone. It's nice to be here with you this afternoon. I too, as I was putting this presentation together this week, was slightly distracted, but I think I have everything covered. I just wanted to give you a brief update about what we've been doing in the ICA, particularly since our closure in March and then reopening in July. And if you could move to the next slide, please. We are currently installing a new exhibition, I'm Yours, Encounters with Art in Our Times. The ICA opened its galleries again in July following all safety and social distancing protocols. This new exhibition that will open in mid-November is a collection show that features the work of artists, the three artists you see here, Cornelia Parker, Simone Lee, and Henry Taylor. And in thinking about this exhibition, the curators were really thinking about how best to present the objects that we hold in our collection and have them be in conversation with the Boston community. So they've created a series of vignettes, scenes, if you will, each dealing with a different topic like home, community, family. So we're really excited to open this show. And if you're feeling like you can come to the museum safely, we definitely encourage that. Next slide, please. In October, we actually reopened Ragnar Kjartansen's The Visitors. This has been on view several times. In thinking about this particular piece that is in our collection, many of us in conversations at the ICA thought this was a very appropriate piece to bring back in the COVID era. The musicians are socially distanced among these different screens and in a single house. They are playing instruments together and collectively create this sort of beautiful, feminist, epic, Icelandic saga. It's an incredible piece, and I've heard reports, I actually haven't been in the galleries to see it, but many people have been slow dancing as they're visiting, and it's actually an emotional experience for a lot of people who come see it. Next slide, please. And I'm really excited to announce that in November, we will open a new exhibition by the South African visual artist William Kentridge called Kaboom. This is actually based on one of his sort of monumental large-scale theatrical productions that he's made. And he's looking, as in most of his work, at colonial histories. And here he's looking at the narrative of African porters used by British, French, and Germans during World War I. So it's this really sort of layered, multidisciplinary approach to his visual art making that incorporates layers of drawings projected onto paper props and found objects that also is combined with a vivid and particularly haunting musical score. We've had opening celebrations for the Ragnar, where we invited our audiences to create responses. I think someone sent a video of themselves singing in a bathtub, which Ragnar does in that piece. We had a lot of fun with that. And we will also host an opening celebration virtually in December for I'm Yours. Next slide. Like so many of us working in the cultural sector, we have been figuring out how best to connect with audiences safely and virtually. We've hosted a number of virtual performances and workshops. Here you can see we, in the summer, launched Sunday brunch jams, working with some of Boston's most talented DJs. We've had DJ nights over the summer. We thought this was a really interesting way to go because thinking of screen fatigue, these were encounters that a viewer could simply turn on the screen and listen to it or engage directly through Instagram or Zoom or whichever platform we were using. We also worked in partnership with Berklee College of Music, which we do every year, to host 4 Harbor Walk Sounds events in August. And that was a really interesting experiment of actually being in the space and recording music and then broadcasting it live. It was great for all of us who have missed hosting performances within our spaces to be able to reconvene and bring musicians and all of our production crews together again. And on the right, you'll see that amazing image of Queen Doll, Boston area hip hop artist. We recently, actually last week, hosted a program in collaboration with WBUR. Queen Doll was selected as the Massachusetts favorite in NPR's Tiny Desk Concert competition. His submission was selected among a panel of WBUR brought together. And in thinking about this, we had learned and were clarified that we couldn't have any singing indoors. So working with Queen Doll, we actually staged this performance outdoors. The all of the dancers had in-ear headphones, and the DJ was playing the music. Queen was hearing that track, singing with no backup. So there were audience members that were watching and they were completely confused, but as you'll go and see in the actual video, it all comes together quite beautifully. And we were grateful to work with WBUR for that. Next slide, please. And of course, we've been hosting our First Friday programs every month, working with so many Boston artists. I think that's been a real privilege for all of us in this time, is to engage and invite so many talented artists to think about how to present work in the virtual space. You have the Davis sisters here, Oompa performing a homage to Ragnar's Visitors, and we had a number of drag queens perform in our Pride takeover. Next slide, please. And one thing that's been really great is our education department has been hard at work creating workshops and conversations for all of us to participate in. Last week, we hosted our second ICA forum on racism, public health, and contemporary art. It was a panel conversation that featured Dr. Carolyn Crockett, Chief of Equity for the City of Boston, Dr. Kimberlyn Leary, Associate Professor at Harvard's Chan School of Public Health, Amanda Taffy, who's a doctoral student at the Chan School, Boston artist and exceptionally talented photographer O.J. Slaughter, and choreographer Bill T. Jones, in a conversation that was moderated by cultural columnist for the Boston Globe, Janae Osterhelt. This conversation was recorded and actually is available to view on our website. So if you're interested, it was a fascinating conversation. I was particularly interested in the generational perspectives that were present throughout the conversation. So I'd highly recommend you going to look at that. Next slide, please. We have upcoming artist conversations. Zanelli Maholi, a South African-based artist, and Rania Matar, a photographer based here in Boston, will present conversations with our curators. Both of these artists are included in our I'm Yours exhibition. We'll have a number of artist conversations in the coming months. These are the two that we have announced so far. We have more in the works. Zanelli will speak in November and Rania in December. And I would also say that Rania has been doing really incredible work documenting families and people in this moment of the pandemic. They're quite beautiful images. So hopefully she'll be talking about that in her conversation, but I'd highly recommend it. In addition, we've been hosting a series of wellness workshops that we've called Wellness Together, that really center on individual and collective well-being through mindful creative encounters. We've been working again with Boston artists, and these workshops have included meditations of movement practices, art making, and in each of these workshops, the hope is, and I think we've been successful, is to allow participants to sort of center themselves, but also connect to each other through a virtual space. And as we all know, that's not as easy to do some days as it is on others. So I think it's been a journey for us, but I think we've had a lot of good feedback and response. So hopefully we'll be continuing those in the future. Next slide, please. We've been offering a lot of programs for families. I mean, also trying to consider what it means for small children to interact with the screen, and with Zoom fatigue in particular. We host our monthly virtual playdates, and that did transition to Zoom activity, but providing enough instruction guidelines that the kids can create an art making activity or do some sort of fun other artist driven encounter and then can come back to the screen. So it's not necessarily that they're sitting there the entire time just staring at that computer. And over the summer, one thing that we at the ICA are really, we feel very happy to have been able to provide. As most of you know, the ICA watershed was not open this summer. We felt it was in the best interest of the East Boston community not to open that space. And so we actually used the watershed, partnering with our catering partners, the Cater to Fair, to provide fresh food to families in East Boston neighborhoods. And within those deliveries, we included care packages, or art packages, excuse me, which you'll see on the right. And these were projects that were created, again, by Boston area artists that would provide activities for children in the community. The instructions were distributed in English and in Spanish, along with all of the necessary craft pieces and drumsticks in one instance that would be needed to complete the project. And we've gotten really great response for that. In fact, in December, we'll be distributing similar kinds of art kits for families in Dorchester and South Boston through public library branches in those areas. So stay tuned for that and be on the lookout. And in thinking about the different communities that we serve, one area, we have family programs and we have teen programs, but what we felt was missing were tween workshops for kids between the ages of 10 and 12. We're thinking of these programs as a bridge between sort of our Playdate audiences and our teen audiences. And so we're going to be launching a series of workshops for 10 to 12-year-olds. I don't know as many details about that. I know the education department and at the ICA is working hard on it, but more details to come. Next slide, please. And of course, the amazing, incredible teens at the ICA. We have a Teen Arts Council made up of Boston area children, many of whom attend Boston Public Schools. They're going to be organizing a November virtual teen night. I believe it's the 19th. These are always incredible, fun, heartfelt, moving, energizing experiences. And the invitation is open to all teens in the Boston area. I don't know what this one is going to be like, but in the past they've had dance troupes come in, or spoken word artists or musicians. And these are programs that are created by teens for teens. And in addition, the Teen Arts Council, who actually creates the teen night, has also been hosting a series of mindfulness workshops for teens in the community. In addition, we've been having our regular classes, Fast Forward, our film production program, our music production program, and a writers group. These are all held virtually, and they are all free for Boston Public School students. So if you know anyone who may be interested, definitely visit our website to learn more. And then finally, in the last slide, we are also launching virtual visits. Over the summer, we piloted this program. And now in the fall, we are working with classrooms digitally. So an art educator will come in a Zoom call and talk through specific works of art, slow looking, trying to get different types of, basically, I know that many teachers are trying to think of creative ways to engage students. And so this was a solution that we thought we could provide. We've been working with many of our partner high schools, and we have now expanded it so that anyone who is in a high school, an educator can contact the ICA and request a virtual visit. I know they have a lot of requests right now, but again, if you know any educators who may be interested in this, please definitely be in touch. And we are also going to be expanding this into sort of adult online learning, so adult virtual visits in the future. And I think that's going to be launching in the winter. So stay tuned for more. Thank you so much for listening. It has been a privilege to work on these projects. It's also been extraordinarily challenging. And I know this is, a lot of you here are thinking through so many of these same questions and issues of how to connect best to communities. So if you have questions, definitely let me know. And also feel free to reach out to anyone at the ICA who's working on these. We'd be happy to talk through it. I think we're all in this as a community. So definitely, please be in touch.
Thanks, John. That was an amazing overview of everything going on at the ICA. It seems like so much activity. I can only imagine how much work is behind all of that. And I love seeing all of the local artists support. So that's really exciting. And yeah, any questions off the bat for John?
I see Ron's question about Artists for Humanity. And I am 98% certain that our Teen Arts Council often works with other teens from Artists for Humanity. So yes, we have.
Great. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if we go to the next slide, we will pass it over to Kata and Eric from the MCC to talk about creative youth development.
And I think Eric is going to start us.
Yeah, I'm here. I actually have 6 children under the age of 8 running around my house, so be prepared for surprises. Thanks for that presentation on the ICA. I mean, that's tremendous. I think Kata and I, we often learn about, the teen program, and we've worked with a teaching artist, but to know that in a broader context of, how hard everybody is working to stay creative and stay engaged is really tremendous. So we just wanted to talk through a few reports that we put together from our time basically since March. One in particular focused on what we heard from final reports, and one I think is a little more connected, which was about a series of calls. Kata, what did we just get to? We hosted one yesterday. Are we at 30?
I think with 27.
27. So in March, we had no idea what to do, like everybody else. And so what we decided would be the best way forward would be to hold space for creative youth development programs to come together and solve problems in real time with one another. And there was a whole lot of social and emotional support as well. And those conversations grew, and they grew and they grew. So I'll talk about that in a second. This first slide really focuses on the final reports that we were one of those evil funders that still required final reports, but we stripped it down to almost nothing, no financial reporting. We just needed to get some real concrete data as we pivoted to the new fiscal year that we're in now, knowing we didn't have a budget, but to figure out what we could do without a budget. So we currently fund 74 creative youth development programs across Massachusetts. The highest concentration, of course, is in Greater Boston. 68 of those are out of school time programs, and then the other 6 are actually in school El Sistema inspired programs. And we asked a couple of basic questions in the report to really understand what the experience for young people and for the organizations that partner with them, what that experience has been. So the first surprising finding was when we asked what happened when COVID hit and the lockdown started. We thought for sure everyone would say we just went remote, and they did. But more often than that, they talked about first finding a way to connect to all the young people in their programs. That was the key piece, and that was a theme that really came through all of these reports, which is this pivot from the creative side to the youth development side. So really seeing the strength of the creative youth development sector as a piece, as a key component of the social service sector. So the first thing we found was that people worked hard to connect with young people. Young people had varying experiences of that initial months of the shutdown, and that were onto the summer. A lot of them, what we heard is that they sort of receded. I mean, all of us were overwhelmed and we had no idea what to do. And for young people that were in creative youth development programs, I think one of the big challenges for any out of school time program was that, schools were trying to communicate with young people, and families were, asking things of young people, and out of school time programs were asking things of young people, but none of those 3 sort of systems were talking to each other. And so there was a lot of really overwhelming experience. And the art packet ended up being a really tremendous thing. So organizations really were specific with young people and move their whole organizations to really focus on just being able to connect in whatever way with young people. The second was a huge pivot to online learning, which was not surprising. This varied by, discipline and program capacity and technology inequity, which really highlighted the haves and the have-nots. It really deepened that gap. The third big shift was we saw creative youth development programs start focusing on basic needs like food security and housing security and mental health needs of young people, and even support for families as well. So this is that point where the work that these programs do in communities as community health centers and social service supports, and really sort of traffic controllers for directing young people and families to services, it's where it really emerged. The second part of our report just wanted to document what's coming. To no one's surprise, technology was a huge issue, but it was a really diverse set of set of challenges that were faced. Some were just securing hardware, some were just securing software. A lot of folks were able to do that through partnerships with different companies and organizations, but for some that was not possible. The second problem was training. Teaching artists especially, there's a moment where every single organization and teaching artists had to consider this really difficult question, which was, do we translate the work that we'd been doing online, or do we recognize that we cannot create the kinds of liberating spaces online that we could in our programs, and we need to pivot and do something else? And so I think there's a pedagogy issue there. And then there was also this issue of, okay, if we're going to use a technology piece of software or hardware, how do we use it? And how do we get folks fluent in it, not just teaching artists and organizations, but also young people? And again, the technology inequity. The other huge challenges that are current and coming are, the experience of long-term toxic stress. The health and social supports for young people is key. Many of them were in homes that in some cases were the source of trauma or contributed to it. The social isolation affected young people the same that it affected us. And organizations are really trying to think about what they can do. At the same time that they're utterly overwhelmed and working really hard to make their programs and their connections work, they're still focused on solving or addressing this problem of systemic racism in their communities. One of the things that gives me hope about our current situation right now in our political world is that there is a generation of young people that is growing up in this fight. They see the world and they see art through the lens of trying to address systemic racism. So that's the focus of a lot of these programs, and that's the focus of the Mass Cultural Council largely in FY21, which we're already several months into. If we go to the next slide. So as I was saying earlier, we started hosting these calls on Thursdays when the shutdown happened, and it started with a small group of programs in Massachusetts, teaching artists. We invited young people, we invited organizational leadership. It was just an open space to connect, and those conversations grew to involve folks from the Claire Rose Foundation in San Diego and the Heinz Endowments in Pittsburgh, and then eventually people just started showing up from Texas and New York and Chicago and Seattle. Destiny Arts Center presents, and we built this sort of amazing dialogue that crossed the entire country that was really focused on how to connect and how to solve problems in real time. So after 16 of those calls, we sent out a survey to understand what was valuable about this space, because we were certainly understanding the need, and we were understanding that if 99 people show up to these conversations, that there's some value there. But we wanted to know a little bit more about how we could really focus it and maintain that value as the situation changed. So the first valuable piece of that kind of space, where we came together around key topics, went into breakout rooms, came back together, sometimes went into a second breakout and reported, was really being able to just reflect on their own work and to connect with others who are doing similar work. Those breakout rooms went the range from, geographic distribution to discipline to sort of job responsibility, whether you're, a young person, an alumni or mentor, or you're teaching artists, you're a fundraiser. The third thing it really helped to do was for programs to really listen to young people and understand what they're experiencing during the pandemic on a broad basis, not just in their own programs. The fourth was much more concrete, sharing practices around remote working and teaching. And then the fifth was something that Kate just started doing, which is just cultivating incredible sets of resources that could be utilized kind of that same day or in the near future. So Kate just started putting together pretty massive resources lists that still go out every 2 weeks and are curated in such a way that we hope they sort of distill down through all of the different things that we're experiencing on screens right now, the things that could really help and support these programs. So it's between these two sort of surveys and these two data gathering opportunities that we started to make a plan for what we would do here in FY21. And we're getting close to actually having a budget, which as a funder, it's kind of helpful if you can fund. But this has really been an excellent opportunity to focus on the kinds of services that Mass Cultural Council can provide. So I'll turn things over to Keita, and she can tell you what we're doing with all this information.
Hello. Yeah, so next slide, please. Great. So when, as Eric was speaking, when we surveyed our CYD organizations and teaching artists, there were 6 key aspects that really rose to the surface as kind of needing more of our attention. So these 6 themes we organized under the umbrella of what is the national CYD outcome areas of create, connect, and catalyze, and really decided to focus our calls, which we then switched to every 2 weeks, to be centered on those themes. I also, when I'm done talking, I'll put in the chat just around that national framework if anybody's interested. But you know, what I love about the CYD world is that, you know, we're a field that supports the whole person rather than just looking at one aspect of the person. And in this hard time of triple pandemics and forced isolation, political craziness, it has been made crystal clear in just how our creative youth development organizations are greatly utilizing their skills and providing so many resources for not only the creative health of our teens and young people, but the mental and physical health also. So one thing that was clear over these past 8 months was just like the huge disparities of access. And I think when you look at those 6 sort of themes, you can think about the access to voice, media, you know, internet, just access to programs, mental health, trauma, I mean, undergoing trauma, and also just thinking about, you know, my gosh, it's just, you know, not having really access to not only the internet, but also a quiet space and overall self-care. It reminded me of that quote that I saw on Facebook or somewhere where it's like shouting self-care at people who actually need community care is how we fail people. So we needed to reframe sort of this ecology of self-care to include interconnectedness. And if you see, you know, as in yesterday, God, time is moving so weird. We focused on trauma and mental health largely around the election. But if we go to the next slide, we also wanted to really look at, you know, trauma and mental health, as Eric mentioned, is one of the 3 focuses that we have at the council right now. And so yesterday we had the call, you know, really looking at self-care and community care of our CYD organizations as they care for young people in this time. And we introduced some of the key concepts of the researcher Sean Ginwright. He's a professor at San Francisco State University who's contributed a lot to the greater understanding of not only African-American youth and youth activism and youth development, but also really expanding our ideas of what, you know, how can we go from beyond trauma-informed care to really focus on key aspects of healing-centered engagement. And so just to, I don't know, just to be able to share a little, because I feel like this is so key for our times right now. So this involves 3 main aspects. One is the individual. So that's usually when you think of clinical trauma and helping kids through trauma, it's all about the individual. But what he really talks about a lot is that this needs to be culturally grounded and connected to really the restoration of identity. When we think about how our identities are, you know, oftentimes assaulted in racism, homophobia, sexism, all the isms, that we need to heal some of these aspects. And part of that too is when, you know, oppression really blocks that ability to dream beyond. And if we really are going to create these new systems, you know, we need to be able to have new strategies to be able to shift our gazes into what is truly possible. So that involves number 2, which is interpersonal relationships and communities. We all know how incredibly important that is. But if we're really going to have well-being, and that we need to focus on, instead of just the symptoms, but also just what is the well-being that we truly, truly want, and how can we establish that through partnerships. And that goes to the 3rd point, which is really transforming the institutions, policies, and systems that are causing the harm in the first place. One of Sean Ginwright's quotes is that to take care of others, we need to be committed to our own healing. It's not only self-care, as Emily mentioned earlier, but it is a whole collective movement of well-being. And one of the talks I listened to this week was this one woman, Naeem Oyo from Ifitayo in New York City. She said, art changes culture, culture changes policy, and arts are central and not peripheral to social change. So I think part of that is to look at how can we imagine and build new systems where young people can invest not only in deep creative learning, but that this also involves learning about systemic injustices, and when their truths can be seen and heard, it is then that we really feel like they can become powerful change makers at the center of communities, capable of advancing social justice causes and in partnership with us and transforming our systems. So I think that was about it for us, but I think that just that notion that, yeah, we're in this together truly, and we really can invoke what Grace Lee Boggs talked about, where she said, a revolution that is based on people exercising creativity in the midst of devastation is one of the great historical contributions. So hear ye.
Thanks so much. I feel like this is also really good teeing up for our next meeting on, I guess that's the 20th. Am I making that up? That's the 20th. We're going to have a presentation on the Radical Imagination for Racial Justice program, which fingers crossed we will have public information on that week, public announcement. So I'm hoping that our partners at MassArt can come join us and have a conversation about really talking about racial justice and those systemic issues with young people, and in an intergenerational conversation. But this has been great. I think, do we have any questions? We have a question, Kata, for you in the chat.
Yes. Let me put her name in here. First of all, this is the framework, and then let me grab her name. And I don't know quite yet how to spell Ifatayo. I can look that up, but this was her name. She's the executive director of Ifatayo in New York. And it was part of a call with, just reeling from the elections. And she was one of the speakers on Wednesday.
Any other questions for our MCC colleagues? Highly recommend signing up for that CYD email, which is chock full of so much information. I don't know how you put that together so regularly, Kata.
Well, I have to say part of it is thanks to these calls. You've really inspired us, and all of your resources have been just incredible. So thank you, and thank you, Emily, so much.
Well, thank you both. All right, so I think that is it, and we'll send out the presentation and any other links afterwards to everybody who's registered. And I want to circle back up. There was a question. I think Alex, do you want to? I don't know if you're still here. It looks like you are. Do you want to hop on and just ask your question, or just say a little bit more about this need for space?
Yeah, sure. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm work with the Flavor Continues. We're a nonprofit in Boston, in the Massachusetts, the greater Boston, Massachusetts area. We've been working with a lot of dancers in the community, mostly freestyle dancers and dancers that just don't really have spaces right now. We've been either kicked out of our spaces, or our spaces have been closed. And it's been happening for, I think, since the beginning of this year. Not just due to COVID, but COVID has kind of exacerbated the problem. We have been able to partner with a few people, including Dan, who's in this meeting right now. But we're definitely in need of more of those spaces to kind of just practice and continue to putting out art.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and I could be the subject maybe for a whole meeting, because there are some spaces in development. There are some people doing work trying to figure out pop-ups that are not really pop-ups, but more like long-term using of underutilized commercial space, of which we're going to have even more. And so I wonder if that space conversation is something that we want to focus on. I know there's also some organizations that have space or will have space soon that are trying to figure out what does it look like to to really partner with an organization to make that available. So I think that that could be a good topic for a whole meeting in the future.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
but I appreciate you raising that for sure.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you giving me the chance to voice. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Pascal, you had one?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly mention the Collective Futures Fund. I got this email from Eva Rosenberg and Lori. Christina, is it? I believe I put it in the slide. Oh, here it is. There it is. Yes. So there is a grant that recently opened, and it's a lottery grant. They're giving up to $1,500 to artists. On the slide here, you can see what the eligibility info is if you would like to apply. The deadline to apply for this emergency relief grant is November 27th. It's for visual artists who are over 18. You can't be a full-time student or have a full-time job as an artist. So it's really for the artists who are struggling in this time of the pandemic and haven't been able to continue to make their work, or at least be able to have an opportunity to have their work be seen. So I'm putting the link in the chat as well to the application for the fund. If you are interested, like Cara said, we will be sending the presentation out so you can see more of that information there, but just wanted to give that info out there. So if anybody is interested in applying, they can look out for that.
And I think in the last second here, Brian has a question that kind of is similar to Dan's question earlier. The new guidelines with the 9:30 p.m. closing time, there's a list of kinds of facilities that applies to, which includes performance spaces and other kinds of cultural facilities. I will say, I think the spirit of that ordinance is that you're not open to the public. There aren't members of the public kind of mingling indoor in a space, whether that's a restaurant or an event or something that would be open, like a ticketed museum would fall under that. But if you're operating a space that's not one of those spaces and you're treating it kind of like a private space that's where it's not like open doors, then I think that's fuzzier territory. If you're licensed as a cultural facility of some kind, then you can go to the licensing board at the city. That's someone we can put you in touch with if you want to reach out to me or Pascal, and they can help you think through whether or not what you're talking about is within what they're perceiving as doable under a license, an entertainment license or something like that. But also, Brian, I can't speak to City of Cambridge. So I don't know if Emily has any other insights, but I would say to talk to the City of Cambridge because City of Boston is still in the red zone. And so our rules are a little bit different right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think for questions, it's contact your city's Department of Health. And then I just want to echo the comments that were made at the beginning of this call, and that are what Governor Baker is basically putting out, which is like, we are seeing the second spike, and it's our responsibilities to make sure that we are taking care of each other and taking care of the communities we serve.
Great. And thanks for sharing that, Rich. We'll add that, Pascal, this grant program that was just posted in, we'll add that to our follow-up email and find a link for that. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for a little bit of normalcy and positivity today. And we'll carry that spirit into the weekend and late into the night, beyond. All right. Thank you. Have a good one.